What is up, ninjas? My name is Semworld, and today we're going to be entering the world of complex chord progressions. Now, I get asked this question a lot, and this video is meant to answer that question, and that is, how do I make longer / more complex chord progressions? So today I'm going to be going over 10 techniques that you guys can utilize so that you don't end up with the same boring chord progression that you always tend to end up with. This is just something that happens out of habit, I understand, and I hope that these 10 ways will inspire you or help you out in creating a more interesting, spicier chord progression. Now, the first thing to get out of the way, guys, is that the 10 techniques I'm going to show you can be a bit overkill sometimes if you're not using them in the right environment, in the right genre. Similar to if you were to go on a date with your girl to get McDonald's, which that would be a bad date, but if you show up in a motherfucking suit at McDonald's, it really doesn't call for the setting. That suit could have been used more at a high-end restaurant. Same thing here. You might have a super complex chord progression in a song like Big Room where it just doesn't fit. You're better off going with the standard stuff, and I can understand you might be like, but Sen, I want to sound different. But a lot of the times you can sound different by just composing and using different instruments to create that chord progression into a song. But with that being said, guys, if you guys want to support the channel, you can go over to evilsounds.com, and let's get started with this tutorial. Tip number one, guys, is that you don't always have to start on the root note, on the one, or on the tonic for your chord progression. Now, for the simplicity's sake of this tutorial, we're going to be utilizing the A minor scale, which is all the damn white keys starting on A. So for instance, if we have a chord progression here, we don't always need to start it on that A. We can start it on other popular areas like the F and the D. So for this technique, it's actually pretty simple. Instead of starting on the A, you start on the F or the D. Now, this technique works really good when you have a melody that is starting on that A note, on the root note. And the reason for that is that F and that D will harmonize it a lot better than if we were to go with that A. For instance, sounds the same, so much better. So you can see that F just harmonizes that a lot better. And if we turn this into a chord now, which is just the A and the C here, but if we go with that A note again, it just doesn't give it that same vibe. So this is something good that you can do to start it there. We can also go with that D here. So let's make a quick chord progression here. Go to that F, just work our way up and go with that A there. Very standard one. We can also just do this variation where we have the F, G, and the A, which is a very common one in EDM. Okay, so it works. You don't have to start on the root note. I think this one a lot of people know already, but just in case you're starting out making music and you seem to always go with that one, started on the one, let me open up your eyes and tell you, you don't need to always start on the one. Number two, guys, is gonna be rhythm. A lot of you guys don't like your chord progressions and you feel like they're boring because you always do the very standard 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is the ba, ba, ba. So what you can do is you can change the rhythm of when the chord changes. That's something that maybe has to do with a little bit of laziness. You're just like boom, boom, boom. Okay, that's my chord progression. So you need to put in a bit of work. So here I'm gonna show you guys some things that you can do to get a different rhythm. All right, guys. So in this example here, we have a standard chord progression. Okay, so this is something that, again, the rhythm is just very standard. 1, 2, 3, and 4. But one of the things we can do is we can kind of end this chord early and shift this one just right here to get this more. And then again, we do standard, but then here we do it again, kind of have a bit of rhythm going. Okay, so this kind of breaks that 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 to 1, 2, 3, boom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, boom, 1, 2. So you can see we do kind of a little shift there. Now, this can be used a lot in other styles as well. For instance, here we have another chord change that happens. And in this one, we have a little bit more chords going, like chord, 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 chord. So it sounds like. And that sounds so pleasing. So here what we've decided to do is instead of having this just be on the standard beat here, which would be on the half. So that sounds boring, but if we again go back to what we had where we kind of have this one be a little bit more swingy. Okay, so there we've opted to add an extra chord again. We've added a bit of a change in the rhythm, so it's not so stale, so static, and that helps in getting something that sounds a little bit more complex. It's still the basic chord progression, the basic triads, the basic minor, but it sounds a bit more to you because now we've added those rhythm changes. And you can do this as any way as long as it works. I mean, for instance, here I could have just done this. We can try this out. So let's see if that works. Here, maybe we can even like have this one come in a little bit, yeah, because that sounded a little bit boring. Technique slash tip number 3, guys, is going to be to have a major to minor chord change. Now, this one has been made heavily popular by the man himself, deadmau5, in the world of EDM. Of course, if you guys have heard the Some Chords song, then you guys have heard this technique used before. Now, other artists I really like Jay Hardway and Brooks, use it in some other songs as well. Now, this technique is pretty simple, and it's just strategically changing from a minor to a major chord to get that kind of very spacey vibe. So this technique is useful if you're trying to spice up your chord progression and if you're going for something like fucking out of Interstellar. Alright, guys, so here, in order to create something like Interstellar or do a minor to major change, for instance, here we have the A minor chord. If we want to do that change, we can just shift this guy up by 1, and now we're in a major chord. But that gives us the effect of, and now if we accentuate that chord out to just a very generic one. Okay, pretty simple there. Now, the key thing here, guys, is to characterize what chords are minor or major, and then you can do those changes to them. For instance, another chord in the A minor scale that is going to be easy to change is going to be that D. So here we have the D in the A minor. Now, if I want to turn this D chord into a D major, then and then here I can do that. So it gives the same effect, and the key thing is using those strategically at certain points to get something that sounds good. There are so many variations that we can do, but the trick is knowing when to use it, and if it sounds good, awesome. If it doesn't, then finding another way to implement it, or maybe not implementing it at all. But this is a simple trick you can do that a lot of people have been using for ages, even Hans Zimmer, to create like Interstellar soundtrack, anything sounding spacey and whatnot, like Jay Hardway's track called Sio, Brooks' Sphinx. These are some of my favorite ones that utilize this trick. Make sure to check them out. I would put them in the video, but I would get copyrighted. But check them out, guys, if you want to see how you can use this trick even further. Number 4, guys, is to just focus on the bottom notes of your chord progression before developing it into a full-out chord progression. What this means is that obviously if we see a full-out programmed chord progression, that might look intimidating. You might start with 5 notes and go, all right, where do I go from here? And that might intimidate you a lot. A lot of people aren't comfortable just going like, okay, I'm gonna go here, 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 when they see a lot of notes. So one of the things you can do to simplify this process down is to just focus on that bottom note and then develop it into a full-out chord progression after you have the progression of the bottom note down. The cool thing about this is that if you treat it sort of like a deep house track where a lot of people are like dun 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 dun. When we do that rhythm there, for say, those notes are called passing notes or passing chords, because when we develop them into chords, you're gonna have those passing chords, which is gonna make that chord progression not sound like ba ba. It's gonna make it sound like ba 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 ba. You know, so that's kind of like what we call a passing chord. It's just a fancy way of saying that, guys. But that's a cool way to start a chord progression in a simple way that will help a lot of you guys out, I am sure. And this is how I would do it. All right, guys, so utilizing the A minor scale again, let's just assume that we're doing something like a bass progression in a way. So we can kind of go, it's just something where it's like tu, 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 if you want to go with a very standard rhythm. And then here we can kind of do the standard passing chord or passing notes. For instance, let's say from A, we want to go down to a D, we can do. Do, 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 do. And then this is just a very simple one of what we can do with this. Here we can, let's try that. And then bring it back home. Okay, so once we have that, obviously we don't want to keep that rhythm. We just want to create our progression like that, because we can do a lot of cool stuff. If you think about it more as a deep house kind of drop in a way as well, you can do 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 a lot of crazy things with it. So now once we have this, Let's create this into a chord here. We'll go 2 up on more. Okay, and let's put this up an octave there. All right, so there we can fine tune. We can see this one's just a bit too much. Let's try not even a B, because that's going to be one that's not going to work. I mean, you could try it now. There we go, baby. And that's how we would create something like that, utilizing just the bass note first. Now, you don't have to go this way as well. You can just hear this and just focus on this note instead of, again, looking at that massive progression. Some chords, I know you guys like to extend them out more, but it just helps so much, especially if you're not comfortable with looking at a bunch of chords. Now, there are other techniques you can impose on this guy here, which we are going to get into in the next remaining tips. Again, we have 10 tips in this video, which will help in even making this just be a bit more unique. But let's get on to the next tip. Number 5, guys, is to use different scales. A lot of you guys are always using the same damn scale. Like for me, instance, I'm using the A minor scale throughout this whole tutorial, so of course it all sounds the same. But if you switch a scale, learn a new scale, for instance, a harmonic minor, or you could do a major or a blues scale, a Spanish gypsy scale, you can get different chord progression. Now again, don't just be like, I'm gonna use a Spanish gypsy scale to sound different. If you're going for that kind of Arabic kind of gypsy vibes, then for sure it's something that you can do. Now for scales, I personally like to use Piano World. Piano World has an abundance of scales that you can use, guys. And if you Google Piano World scales, it's the first thing on Google, and you can go through a bunch of them. And I feel like those scales are fucking awesome to just go through nowadays, just to kind of find something different. You might find different scale combinations you can do and whatnot. But that's something that you can do. I'm not going to show an example for this one just because I feel like it's very self-explanatory. But an example is Kashmir's music. If you hear, he likes to use that harmonic minor a lot in some of his tracks, which gives him that very ethnic vibe. Tip number 6, guys, is a technique if you want to add this sort of tension, or if you're making damn trance. Now, I learned this technique by watching one of audience interviews from back in the day with Sonic Academy, where he says that he has a bit of a chord progression going with one note on top all the way through. This helps create a lot of tension, very similar to how a lot of people like to put that string on deep house, that string going all the way through to create that tension. Now, the cool thing about this one is that that top note, what can happen with that is that you can have it sort of go slowly up or go slowly down or change maybe every 2 bars, every 4 bars, you know, throughout the progression to create tension, to add another element to your chord progression. It's a bit hard to explain, but let me show you how we would do that, as this is a super dope one if you're making anything that uses very long breakdowns, or you just want to add a bit of tension into your chord progression. All right, guys, so for this example, we have a chord progression here. And then it just repeats. So the trick itself is pretty standard, and there's various ways to do it. The question you have to ask yourself is what you are trying to achieve with it. So one of the things that we might want to use it for is to create a bit of tension. So let's say I use the root note and just add this all the way through. So the crazy thing about here, if you look at it theory-wise, we have the A here, which is very stable. It's part of the chord. Here, it's not stable, so it creates dissonance. Here, it is pretty stable, and then here, it's a stable again, stable, dissonance, stable, stable. You can switch this up so it's always unstable to like a G. As you can see there. But then my favorite way of using it, and the way I used to use it in trance, which is what they would do a lot, is that note would be on top. Let's say we go to that A, but we would have it move here and there, not with the chords, but in its own speed. So for instance, here I could do like... So now if I bring this up, this is what it's doing. Let's add a change here, going up. Now, the cool thing about this, again, guys, is, as you know, we're making chord progressions for music, right? So a lot of times this would be played by like a pad altogether. Now, I don't know my music theory, so I wouldn't be able to say what the name of that is. It could be augmented or just an addition to it, but it creates such great vibes to it. So if we add something here like a super saw, maybe let's try this one. And that sounds so godly. If I take those out, it still sounds good, but just it lacks that nice, you know, fucking shit. All right, that's how good I think it sounds like. So if I add this A across, I can do that, which sounds like this now. And of course, there's various variations you can do of this. Like here, we can just have it on the 5th of the A minor chord all the way through. Move it up. So you can do a lot with it. The idea, though, is just having that note be all the way through, and then you can add kind of shifts to it. You might consider this a melody in a way, but I feel like it's part of the chord, as there would be another melody playing, and this would be harmonizing the melody as well. But this is a trick that I've learned from making trance back in the day, guys, and it's a trick that has stuck with me ever since. You can hear it a lot in deep house, where someone will just have a string probably playing that, you know, that note here, the 11th note before we complete the octave of the scale. And then there's other scenarios for it. I'm sure that you guys, if you listen out for it, you will hear. But that is going to be this tension technique that you can use. Tip number 7 for making a longer chord progression, guys, is going to be to avoid the 1. Now, the 1 is going to be that moment in the song where we feel at home, we feel safe, we're like, ah. And if you avoid hitting the 1 till the end of your chord progression, let's say you have an 8-bar chord progression, when people hear that, they're just going to go like, ah, fuck yeah. You know, you can tease it throughout the chord progression. Now, the hard thing about doing this, guys, is that as you're creating a chord progression that is long and never hits the 1, it can feel a little bit like the listener is lost. They're like, oh, okay, where the fuck are we going? Until we finally hit that 1. It takes a bit of skill to do, but I'm going to show you guys some cool tips that you can utilize to do this effect properly by using harmonic chords. What that means is using a chord and using a different chord that's similar to that chord, but it's harmonic to it. I don't know how to explain this stuff, but it will make sense once I show you guys. Alright, guys, so in this scenario we have this kind of 8-bar loop, which is really a 4-bar that's just being looped. You kind of duplicate it. So the question is, how the hell do I make this into an 8-bar loop? What can I do? Well, the first thing is you're gonna let that first bar loop go, right? Which sounds like this. Now here is where you can start to add a bit of change to this progression. For instance, instead of hitting that A again, we can choose a harmonic counterpart of it, which could be the F or the D. Since I'm hitting the F before it, however, I kind of want to do a deceptive cadence. What that means is this F is setting us up to come back to that A. However, I'm going to say fuck it and go down more and keep going with the chord progression. Now, the idea here is it's supposed to sound good, and it's supposed to allow the progression to keep going rather than ending it and looping it all over again. So let's see how that sounds like. Okay, let's say, oh, that's not enough, man. This sounds too the same. You know, that first note change, yeah, but I want to add more changes to it. What can I do? Well, here you can easily try other chords after this one. You just got to follow it up with something that will sound good. It's like you're letting that chord progression still go. Here, for instance, I could choose to take this F to an A, which is what I don't want to do, because then it's like bringing it back to the 1. So maybe what I can do is bring this down to maybe a C.
Okay, cool. Now you're like, okay, cool, man, but I still don't like those two last notes because I want them to be different. You remember, guys, it's okay to be the same and have a few variations here and there. However, if you want to do that, let's say fuck it and let's just elongate this. I like the way this sounds elongated, I think. And repeat. And then here, if you want to end it, before you go into that build-up, you can just add one last change to the A. And then you end the progression there. So that's an 8-bar loop that we can do, guys, as you guys can see there. The idea here and the way this works is because the F is setting us up to return to the A. You can consider that sort of like a cadence chord. And I know there's multiple types of cadences, but this is a cadence chord that is good so that you can return back to that A. If you use lead voice and you can see F, then to A and C, this one is really good to go back to that A chord. Here we could have just stuck with it. But what we're doing is using it as a deceptive manner. That's what a lot of people tend to call it, where you use a cadence chord, but instead of going to the 1, you're like, fuck it, and you just keep going with the progression, changing it up. That is what's referred to as deceptive. And you can use that to elongate it more.
Tip number 8, guys, is to utilize sustain 2 and sustain 4 chords. So let's say we have an A minor chord, which is that A, the C, and the E. A sus 2 chord will have the A, the B, the C, and the E in it. A sus 4 will have that D instead of that B in it. This is a good chord to start with in a chord progression off. It creates a lot of tension, it gives a nice vibe, and then you can always switch from the sus 4 A minor chord down to just the standard A minor, and it does a nice change and it sounds different, as a lot of people don't use it. So this is a good option for some of you guys that just want to start a chord progression off with something new, something fresh, and this is how we would do that.
All right, guys, so in the video I called them sustained chords, I believe, but they're actually called suspended chords. Simple mistake. But pretty much here we're going to be using them to create a chord progression. I'm going to show you guys ways that you can incorporate them into your chord progression like a boss. The first thing here, guys, is in order to create them, it's pretty simple. If you have a chord progression, you just shift it up by 1 note in the scale to get the suspended 4, and you shift it down by 1 note in the scale to get the suspended 2nd. Now, using them, there are a couple of ways to use them. The first way is you're holding out the chord progression. What that means is, let's say I want to hit the A twice, but you don't want to make it sound boring. Well, I can hit it with that suspended 4. Okay, that's one way that we can use them. The other way we can use them is we can just go like, fuck it, I'm just going to use it whenever I want because I like the way it sounds. So, instance here, I can hit it with that sus2 here on this F. Okay, as you can see there, now this works as well because when you do these kind of suspended chords, if you can tell, the lead voicing kind of changes a little bit. Here, this transition from this chord to this chord is a lot smoother just because of the suspended 2nd F chord here. If I put this here, where this F, this G is here. Now, if I do it again here, the transition's just a lot smoother, so we can use it that way. Now, what you have to look out for when you're using these chords is sometimes you might hit the suspended 4 of the F minor. That one does not sound good at all because we're going to be hitting that 2nd note in the minor scale, and that note, I forgot the term for it, but it's just not a great note. So you sometimes have to look out for that. Sometimes they might not work when you're hitting certain notes that are very dissonant compared to everything else. They're not part of the pentatonic scale per se. But now the other thing we can do is we can hold out, as you guys saw in the first with the A. For instance, here, if I decide to go to this E down here, I can do a suspended 4 here, which would sound like this. Hold out for it. So very emotional, as you can see, but it's heavily used, and it's something that you guys might want to look into. These are going to be suspended 2 and suspended 4 chords. The more popular one to use is going to be the suspended 4, guys, and they're used a lot, again, to delay to delay it to a resolution, or to increase the chord that you're on, but without making it sound kind of boring. You can do a lot with them, and if you guys want to learn more about it, definitely check it up, learn more about it. You know, there's a lot more to them for sure, but definitely one thing you can use to spice up your chord progression.
Tip number 9, guys, is going to be to utilize inversions. Now, an inversion is pretty simple to do. You have a chord progression, let's say like the A minor, and you have that E up there. You can just move that E down an octave and you have an inversion. Now, this is really useful if you have big jumps in your chord progression. Let's say you're going from A here up to like a motherfucking E up here. You can do inversions to kind of bridge the gap, make it sound a lot smoother. It takes a bit of skill and a bit of understanding to pull off, but it just doesn't hurt to like go like, I'm gonna fucking do an inversion and put that down an octave and see it work. We're gonna do a chord progression here with an inversion so you guys can see it done, and you can see the different vibe it gives. And again, you can use it strategically, maybe doing it in some parts of the chord progression to just make it sound a bit different.
All right, guys, now chord inversions are pretty simple to execute. What you really have to do is just move down an octave one of the notes that you have in your chord progression. It cannot be the root note because then you're just open voicing it up. But if we move this down, let's say this E down, that's our second inversion, which is a very popular inversion that we can use. And then the C is the first inversion, which I'm not a huge fan of. Usually that second one is the money maker, because what I can do is, let's say I want to go from an A chord in the minor scale down to that E again, and I want to make that sound a lot smoother. Then what I can do is bring this guy down, second inversion, and now we have this sort of kind of leading into each other. And now we just make this chord progression here, and now we have this kind of nice vibe to it. And that sounds totally different than what a lot of people are doing, where they just do the one like this. Okay, so the purpose of lead voicing, again, is to kind of bridge those gaps whenever we run into them. Like, for instance, here, the A being, this E being so separated from everything else around it. So let's say we do another one, and let's see if I can pull this one out of my butt right here. So what we can do maybe is go A, C, E, and go up to maybe, I don't know, like a E. Let's try maybe a C. And then we can maybe go down to an F. Okay, we'll use that there, and then we can just duplicate that across. Okay, so here I can do an inversion on the C here. And that inversion, what we want to look at is what note can I move down that's going to be so separated away from these. So here I can maybe move down this G. And that gives me just a way smoother transition from here to here. For instance, here, let's say I want to do it to all of it. We can do that as well. 2 inversions here. Switch it up here if you want. Okay, so those are inversions, guys. Use them how you want. Again, remember, these are just rules, guidelines. You don't have to follow them like, oh, I only need to use them when I want to smoothen it. If you want to create like kind of like an 8-bar progression where it's still the same, but you want to add a few changes, you can use inversions to help you out with that.
And the last tip/tool that you can use, guys, are going to be 7th-style chords, which is pretty simple. Instead of having the normal 3 notes, the triad, you're going to have a 4th note added onto there. So if we're in the A minor chord, we have that A, the C, the E, and now we're going to have that G added there. And that is going to be a 7th chord. That's going to sound pretty nice if you want to try it out. Again, you can hear a lot in future bass, but this is how they sound like, and this is how you would program it.
All right, fam, and the last thing I want to get into are 7th chords. Now, the normal chord will be like this, where you have 3 notes, which are the triads. We get it by 1, 2, 3, as you know, and 1, 2, 3. Now, if we add one more, 1, 2, 3, we get the perfect, the 7th chord. And that gives us that vibe. Now, this chord progression or these type of chords are good for like piano house, deep house, stuff like that, where you kind of want that nice vibe, future bass. But I wouldn't hear this in like a main stage anthem or like a big room anthem. Just more in this like the chiller side of EDM. For say, if I make a chord progression with 7th chords, a lot of people will just, if they use 7th chords, all of their notes are going to be 7th chords. That's what I tend to see in a lot of songs. So we'll see something like this. Okay, so really cool to use, but one thing I've also seen is that a lot of people try to kind of break that, oh, it's all 7th chords, and they'll have something, for instance, like going from a 1 to the 5th chord. In essence, it would be the E here, and that creates such a nice vibe to it. If we look at that, and let's kind of move that here like so, and then we'll hit an F after that. It gives such a nice vibe, and this is an example from one of Flume's songs where he does it, and it just sounds really good, where he doesn't have a 7th chord here. And then here maybe we can do the A. And probably needs the 5th there as well. But again, guys, those are going to be 7th chords. Use them how you please. A genre I see this a lot is in future bass. And again, it's a nice kind of chord progression we can use for like more of the piano house, more of the chill stuff where you want to have this stuff. But those are going to be all the tips I have for you guys, man. This video took me like 6 hours to make just to get the recordings and all that, guys. But I hope that you guys enjoyed it and learned a couple of things. By all means, look into every little thing I talked about, because I didn't touch upon them how I wanted to, in the sense that I told you everything about them. So if you found one really interesting and you want to use it in the song, make sure to look it up online, see if there's like a YouTube video that goes full out in depth on that, if that's what you enjoyed. All right, ninjas, and those are going to be my 10 tips for you guys to create more complex chord progressions. My goal with this tutorial was to give you guys more options and more tools to utilize when you're doing chord progressions, and I hope that this video has inspired you, and hopefully next time you're making a chord progression, one of these will pop up in your head and it will make that chord progression sound a lot better. At the end of the day, guys, make sure to keep it simple, make sure it sounds good, make sure it works for your genre. That is more important than having a complex chord progression, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. As always, guys, if you want to support the channel, you can go over to evilsounds.com. If you have tutorial suggestions, you can leave them down in the comments below. But other than that, we are done here, guys, and I hope that you guys, again, enjoyed that video. Peace out, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, and Happy New Year.